So here we are talking about literary context in Acts chapter 4. So Acts chapter 1, Jesus ascends. Acts chapter 2, the Spirit is poured out. That changes everything. Theologians of all stripes will look at Acts chapter 2 and see that something is radically different in the life, existence, and experience of the church from Acts chapter 2 and forward. The question that or questions that we tend to talk about returns to this descriptive or prescriptive. Just Luke is obviously indicating something new and different on the stage with the Spirit being poured out on all. But just what are we supposed to do with that? And theologians of different stripes, we debate that point. In Acts chapter 3, you have the healing of the lame man in the temple, and here you see Peter and John performing a miracle very similar to what Jesus has performed. That's instructive. That's important. In Acts chapter 4, Peter and John get in trouble for performing this miracle, and they are tried in a sense and released. But it is the first time now that you see the apostles in chapter 3 and chapter 4 then enduring the same kind of adversity that Jesus does, and that's also instructive. As Jesus did, so the apostles did. As Jesus taught, so the apostles taught. As Jesus suffered, so the apostles suffered. That's a kind of way of thinking about these bookended books, right? Luke and Acts. So you have the trial of Peter and John. You have the presence of the Spirit in Acts chapter 4, and because of the presence of the Spirit in verse 31, the apostles and others, I think, they speak the word of God with boldness. And then we start talking about the commonality of goods. There seems to be something going on, both in Acts 2, I mentioned verses 44 and 45 in one of the other videos, and then here in Acts chapter 4, about how the Spirit impacts the economics of the early church. So then in response, people give, or people sell off property and give so that the needs of others can be met. And then in chapter 5, we have Ananias and Sapphira. And these folks have a field, they sell it, and they hold back some of the money. But they lie about it. They say they've given it all, but they haven't given it all. And then they're struck dead. And Finger deals with that as well. I won't belabor that point. But that's something that happens coming out of this section we're dealing with here in chapter 4. And then in chapter 6, we have this conflict between the Hebrew and the Hellenistic women. That is, between the Jewish women and the Greek women who are disciples of Jesus. And we're being set up here for one of the major theological challenges of the first century, and that is, how do Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, how do they function together? Does one have to, if one is Roman, for example, and wants to come to Jesus, wants to express faith in Jesus, does that person have to convert first to Judaism and then to Christianity, or can one move directly from their lives as a non-Christian person to becoming a Christian, embracing the faith of the early church without converting to Judaism? And so what's going on here with Ananias and Sapphira in chapter 5, and then the conflict with the Hellenistic and Hebrew women in chapter 6, just presages all of that we see in Acts 8, 9, 10, 11, and 15. It's not unrelated. So that kind of helps set up some of the literary context for Acts chapter 4, verses 32 to 35. We'll come back in a few minutes and talk about some of what I think are important points in this particular little paragraph.